The smell hit you before anything else. Wet ash, cold mud, and underneath all of that, something sharper, something that made your stomach turn. The sour, hollow smell of human beings who hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. The roads cutting through what used to be German towns were lined with it, women with dresses hanging off their shoulder blades like cloth on a wire hanger, old men sitting against bombed walls, barely moving, barely blinking, children with eyes too big for their faces and too still for their age. This was Germany, April 1945. Not the Germany of the newsreels, not the marching soldiers and the red banners and the terrifying war machine that had swallowed most of Europe whole. That Germany was already dead. What was left behind looked more like a punishment from God than a country. And into that wreckage walked the American soldier, exhausted, dirty, carrying more food in his canvas pack than most German civilians had seen in months. That was the cruelty of it. Simple and impossible at the same time. The soldiers had the food. The people were starving. And a piece of paper, a cold, official piece of paper, stamped with the authority of the Supreme Allied Command, said the two sides could not touch. They called it the Non-Fraternization Policy. And somewhere in a clean, dry office, far from the mud and the hollow faces, it probably made a kind of sense. The Allied commanders were scared of sabotage, scared of soldiers being manipulated, scared of the enemy wearing a civilian face. So the orders came down hard and clear. No speaking to German civilians, no trading with them, no smiling at them. And under absolutely no circumstances were American soldiers to feed them. Handing a starving child a piece of chocolate wasn't considered kindness. It was considered helping the enemy. It could get you court-martialed. It could strip your rank and lock you away while your unit finished the war without you. Now hold that image for a second. Really hold it. Because this is where the story lives. Picture a crossroads on the edge of a ruined German village. No famous name. Just mud and broken brickwork and the hollow frames of buildings that used to be someone's home, someone's shop, someone's whole life. A squad of American soldiers has stopped their convoy to rest. These are young men, most of them barely past 20, farm boys from Ohio, factory kids from Detroit, boys raised by mothers who told them to always help someone in need. They're sitting on the hoods of their Jeeps, cracking open their ration tins, the sharp little sound of a can opener cutting through metal, and then the smell. Warm pork and beans rising into the cold morning air, rich and ordinary and almost violent in a place this stripped of everything normal. That smell travels. It curls down ruined streets. It slips under broken doorways. It finds people hiding in the cold dark who haven't smelled anything like it in weeks. And from the shadow of a collapsed brick wall, she appears. She moves slowly. Not because she's being careful, because slow is all her body has left. She's young, maybe mid-20s. But hunger has a way of aging a face fast, and hers has been aged hard. Her dress hangs off her frame the way clothes hang off something being used up from the inside. Her cheekbones sit too close to the surface. Her lips are dry and cracked. But the thing that stops the soldiers mid-chew, the thing that lands in the chest like something dropped from a height, is her stomach. She is heavily pregnant. She walks toward them with one hand pressed to her lower back and the other hanging loose at her side, trembling. She doesn't speak English. She doesn't say a single word. She just lowers herself to her knees in the mud, slowly, carefully, the way people move when falling is a real danger. And she looks at the open tin of food in the nearest soldier's hand, just looks at it. Her eyes aren't begging exactly. They're past begging. They have that flat, focused look of a person who has hit the bottom of something and found nothing underneath. A mother who knows the life inside her is running out of time, and she has run out of options, and this is the last thing she can think to do. The soldiers look at her, then at each other, then at the sergeant standing at the edge of the convoy. Every single thing these boys were raised to be is screaming at them to reach into their packs, to give her something, anything. But the rules are right there, wrapped around their throats like a hand. The military police patrol these roads. One wrong move and it's not just them, it's their whole unit. So they sit there, holding their food, watching her kneel in the mud, feeling the specific suffocating shame of men who know exactly what the right thing is and cannot do it. If you've ever been in a moment where doing the right thing was going to cost you something real, and you had to decide in seconds, then you already understand what those boys were feeling. And if you believe that real human compassion should never be strangled by a rule written by someone sitting safely far from the mud, type the word compassion in the comments right now. Because what comes next is the story of one man who agreed with you, and he had enough stars on his helmet to do something about it. The rumble reached them before they saw it. That deep vibration you feel in your back teeth before your ears fully catch up. The sound of a command vehicle moving hard and fast down a military road. The soldiers heard it, and their bodies reacted before their minds did. Backs straightened, boots found solid ground. Ration tins quietly disappeared. Because coming out of the gray morning mist was a military jeep flanked by military police, flying a red flag from its bumper with 3 silver stars catching the weak spring light like a warning sign. George S. Patton. The blood drained from faces, hearts hammered against ribs. Because of all the people who could have rolled up on this scene, on these soldiers standing awkwardly around a pregnant woman kneeling in the mud, Patton was the worst possible option. This was the man who screamed at soldiers for unpolished boots in an active war zone. The man who slapped a shell-shocked soldier in a hospital and nearly ended his own career over it. The man whose anger was so famous and so explosive that experienced officers had learned to quietly position themselves near exits during his briefings, just in case. If Patton saw what was happening at this crossroads, the blast would be heard back at headquarters. The jeep stopped hard. Engine cut, and Patton stepped out. His boots sank slightly into the wet earth. He stood there for a moment, one hand resting on the door, taking in the whole scene with those eyes of his, gray and cold and sharp as a blade. He looked at the soldiers. He looked at the sergeant. And then he looked down at the woman kneeling in the mud with her hands trembling and her belly carrying a child that this war had no business touching. He didn't yell. That was the thing nobody present that day expected. And the thing none of them ever forgot. No explosion, no famous temper. The silence that fell over that crossroads was the particular heavy silence of a man who is far more dangerous quiet than he is loud. He walked forward slowly, steady, his face giving nothing away. He stopped in front of the lieutenant in charge and fixed him with a look that the young man would probably describe in detail for the rest of his life. No heat in it, none. Just cold, focused. The look of a man who has already made up his mind and is simply waiting for the formality of conversation to finish, and in a voice low enough that only the people closest to him could hear. Not a shout, barely above a whisper, the kind of quiet that carries more weight than volume ever could. He asked one single question. Why has this woman not been fed? The lieutenant swallowed hard, and then did what any soldier does when he's terrified and has rules to hide behind. He recited them, voice shaking slightly. The Non-Fraternization Policy, the directives from Eisenhower's headquarters, the explicit orders that American troops were not a food service for enemy civilians. He laid it all out clearly and correctly, the way a man recites something he's desperately hoping will protect him. Patton listened. He didn't argue, didn't wave it away. He just stood there and let the words settle into the cold air. Let the silence do what silence does when it's placed right next to something obviously and completely wrong. Let the lieutenant hear his own words out loud in front of a pregnant woman on her knees in the mud and feel the full weight of what he'd just said. Then Patton leaned in slightly, eyes narrowing just a fraction, and he said it. We are at war with the German army, son. We are not at war with the unborn. 11 words. And in those 11 words, he cut through years of wartime politics, bureaucratic rules, layers of propaganda and policy and paperwork, and reduced it all down to something so plain and so undeniable that the argument was simply over. Either you agreed with those words, or you were defending something you couldn't defend while looking at a human being in front of you. If you believe that real justice, not the paper kind, not the rule book kind, but the kind that actually means something when you're standing in the mud looking a person in the eye, requires the courage to do what's right even when it costs you, type the word justice in the comments right now. Because Patton didn't stop at 11 words. He followed them with action, immediate, clear, no going back action. He turned to the squad and he gave the order, not loudly, no theater. Just clearly, the way a man gives a command when he is completely certain it is right and has zero patience for delay. He told his men to open their packs. He stood there with his hands on his hips and watched, making absolutely certain that every soldier in that convoy understood they now had the direct, personal permission of the Third Army's commanding general to be human beings again, and the relief on those boys' faces. They moved fast, purposeful, suddenly allowed to be who they actually were underneath the uniform and the orders and the months of war pressing down on them. They brought tins of meat, crackers, canteens of clean water. They knelt beside her in the mud and pressed the food into her hands, some of them struggling to meet her eyes, the way young men sometimes can't handle the full weight of another person's gratitude when they know they should have done it sooner. She wept. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way worn-out people cry when something they stopped believing in finally happens. Trying to form words of thanks in a language these boys couldn't understand, her hands shaking so much that one soldier had to steady the tin for her while she ate. Patton watched the whole thing, stood there and watched his men be human beings. And the aides present that day noted that his jaw was tight and his eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with anger. But he wasn't finished, because Patton understood the difference between a gesture and a guarantee. A gesture is handing someone food and driving away and feeling good about yourself until the next patrol comes through and arrests her for carrying American rations. A guarantee means using every bit of authority you have to make sure the good thing you just did actually holds. He ordered the lieutenant to personally escort the woman to a secure civilian shelter. He told his officers to leave a portion of their reserve rations with her. And he made it absolutely clear, in language that left no room for interpretation, that this woman was now under the direct personal protection of his command. If any military police officer had a problem with a pregnant German civilian carrying American Army food, they were welcome to bring that problem directly to General George S. Patton. Nobody brought that problem to General George S. Patton. Here's what I want you to sit with, because this is the part that gets buried under the stories about the temper and the revolvers and the battlefield brilliance. Patton's own diaries and the letters he wrote home to his wife Beatrice, often late at night when the noise of the day had finally gone quiet, show you a man carrying things that the official history doesn't always capture. He wrote about the refugees, the orphans walking the roads with nothing. The particular kind of weight that comes from seeing suffering your own victories helped create. He could plan the destruction of an entire enemy division and not lose a night of sleep. But a woman starving at a crossroads? That stayed with him. You can feel it in the pages. And what that tells you, what the crossroads tells you, stripped of all the legend and the movie version, is that Patton understood something real about what it means to actually liberate a place. Not just on a map, not just strategically. He understood that if his soldiers lost the ability to look at a suffering person and feel something, if the rules and the grinding wear of war taught them to watch someone collapse in front of them and do nothing, then something would be lost that no amount of military victory could get back, the thing they were supposed to be fighting for. The darkness they were fighting against would have won a different kind of war. Not on the battlefield, inside the men who were supposed to be the answer to it. So he stopped the jeep. He walked into the mud. He said 11 words that cut through everything, and he made his soldiers remember, in the most immediate, real, impossible to argue with way, that they were still men, still human beings. Still capable of something that no policy, no war, no order from a general sitting in a dry office somewhere could make it okay to throw away. Type the word honor in the comments right now if you believe that the true measure of a soldier, the one that matters when the fighting is over, is not how many battles he won. It's whether he kept hold of his humanity while he was winning them. That is what this story is actually about. Not the famous temper, not the ivory revolvers, the crossroads, the mud, the 11 words. The moment the hardest general in the American Army decided that some things simply are not up for negotiation, not for paperwork, not for politics, not for anyone. His humanity wasn't for sale, and he wasn't going to let his soldiers sell theirs either. That is the Patton that history almost forgot to keep. If this story got to you, if it made you feel something, if it made you think about what it actually costs a person to hold on to their decency when everything around them is pushing in the opposite direction, hit subscribe, leave a like, and share this with someone who needs to hear a story like this today. We dig through the diaries, the letters, the first-hand accounts, the things that don't make it into the textbooks, because that's where the truth actually lives. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.